What is going on? It is Nate the Game Guy coming back with another video, and today I want to show off my SEGA Dreamcast collection. The SEGA Dreamcast is one of my favorite game consoles of all time, and currently I have about 152 games for the console, which are all complete in box, not including variants but individual titles. One of my personal goals is to eventually complete my SEGA Dreamcast set, but for the meantime, I plan to show off to you guys some of my favorite games, some of my rarest games, games that I haven't played yet that I do want to try, along with a few other things mixed in here and there when it comes to my SEGA Dreamcast collection. I'm truly happy to have my collection to be as big as it is already. I do plan to share it with you guys today. So, without further ado, let's jump right into this video, take a look at some SEGA Dreamcast games right after the intro. Alright, so I want to start things off strong by talking about some of my favorite fighting games that are on the SEGA Dreamcast that you guys can see right here on screen right now. And I also want to talk about the Street Fighter 3 games. With Street Fighter 3 Double Impact, it is a compilation title which comes with Street Fighter 3 New Generations and Second Impact, which are both absolutely stunning fighting games that I really recommend that you guys do try playing if you haven't played them already. And of course, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, which I would argue is one of the best fighting games of all time. Now, with the Street Fighter 3 games, you don't get the exact same cast that you did with the Street Fighter 2 games, with a few exceptions here and there. It is a cast with a majority of brand new characters, which I would argue are some pretty cool characters. I really like Ibuki, I like Alex, Dudley I think is just totally cool, and there's just so many cool characters that were introduced in Street Fighter 3. Now, I also want to mention too about the Power Stone games. These games were phenomenal. Capcom really brought in some really great exclusive titles with Power Stone 1 and 2 when it was brought onto the SEGA Dreamcast back in their day. It is a total shame that Power Stone just hasn't gotten a new entry. Sure, there has been the Power Stone compilation that went onto the PSP, and from what I've heard, I think there's a new compilation title of Power Stone that is coming out soon. But I do have to say these games were really fun. Do have to check them out because they're just a total blast to play. And then, of course, I have to talk about the Marvel vs. Capcom games. Marvel vs. Capcom, the original, was a great fighting game where it introduced you to be able to have Mega Man fight off against Spider-Man, and it had just a really great cast of characters. But of course, with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, it took things up a step further by increasing the characters that you can choose from in the game. It had an amazing soundtrack. The stages are pretty cool, and I just think that Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is an amazing fighting game. Unfortunately, it is not a cheap game to pick up on the Dreamcast, but I do have to say the quality is right there with this game, is because it is an amazing fighting game, arcade game, and I really do think it is a game that every Dreamcast owner should try to pick up at some point, because I think it is just that great of a fighting game just to add to your collection. So right here, I'm including a little variety of some driving games and racing games that are some of my favorites on the console. And of course, I have to talk about Crazy Taxi. It is a staple on the Dreamcast for good reason. It is a great arcade port that was brought onto the Dreamcast, and it was just a ton of fun to play back in its day, where you would just jump into your taxi, you would try to get your riders to the destination as quickly as possible, and you would just be zooming, weaving in and out of traffic, just running over things, people running out of your way. It was just a great game to play, both in the arcade and of course having it on home console in the Dreamcast. I just cannot recommend it enough if you haven't played it already. And of course, I have to talk about some more amazing arcade ports of some great racers that were put onto the Dreamcast, especially with Hydro Thunder and San Francisco Rush, two amazing arcade racers that were put onto the Dreamcast. I really can't decide which one I prefer most, is because they're just both amazing games. Hydro Thunder was just very cool with its boat racing and how it just went to the next level with just these futuristic boats that you would just be going through these exotic and interesting locations. And of course with San Francisco Rush, where it was just a very futuristic racer, and I had a ton of fun playing that game back in its day. And of course I have to talk about 18 Wheeler. That is another great arcade port that was put onto the Dreamcast, essentially where you would try to take your truck's payload within the quickest time possible with trying to compete with your rival. It would later get a sequel with a completely different name called The King of Route 66, which only got a release on the PS2 when it came to arcade ports that were put onto home console. I talk a little bit more about The King of Route 66 in this video right here, where I do talk about some of the most underrated PS2 titles, but I do have to say that 18 Wheeler is also another underrated title on the Dreamcast, and I just think that is another really fun arcade port that you guys should check out when you have the opportunity to do so. Now, of course, I gotta talk about some platformers on the Dreamcast. Let's face it, the elephant in the room here are essentially the Sonic Adventure games. The Sonic Adventure games were incredible games back in their day, and they are considered to be some of the best Sonic games within good reason too. In fact, Sonic Adventure 2 is my personal favorite game of all time. I think it is just an incredible game with its overall gameplay, its soundtrack, its story. I just think that this game is just an amazing game for good reason, and it just brings a smile to my face that a lot of people do agree with me when I say that I think it is one of the best 3D Sonic games of all time. Now, of course, with talking about some of these platformers right here, Spider-Man was also another cool game back in its day. Unfortunately, I don't remember too much about it, but what I can tell you from what I do remember about Spider-Man was that it was a very fun game, and I do think that is a game that I should check out again at some point, just because from what little I remember about it, I do remember I had a great time playing it. Now, of course, with talking about Donald Duck Going Quackers, I will say that this isn't the best platformer on the Dreamcast, but I do think it is a platformer that is relatively fun. It's essentially a Crash Bandicoot clone, and you know, if you do like Crash Bandicoot from like the old PlayStation 1 days, you'll be right at home with this one. Essentially, you're playing as Donald Duck instead of Crash Bandicoot, but if that doesn't really bother you, I do think it is a great game. I don't think it is as good as the original Crash games that were on the PlayStation, but you know, for what it was back in its day, I thought it was a pretty enjoyable game. And this game, interestingly, also got releases onto the PlayStation 1, 64, GameCube, PS2. I might be forgetting a few consoles here and there with that, but that's okay, because after all, Donald Duck Going Quackers is a pretty alright game if, you know, you get the opportunity to check it out. Now, of course, here are some more favorites of mine on the Dreamcast. As you guys can see right here, these are spanning across multiple genres right here. But I'll start off by talking about Jet Grind Radio. Jet Grind Radio is one of the best games on the Dreamcast, and it is very iconic for good reason. In my opinion, this game is essentially take Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, of course, add some changes to it where it is its own thing, and you are going across Tokyo, and you are doing lots of graffiti, you are running from the police, doing tricks, and it is just a very cool game, the great concept to it, and I think it is just a game that is very memorable for good reason when it comes to some of the best games that are on the Sega Dreamcast. One of the games that I'm showing right here that you guys might be surprised that I'm talking about that I do like is Sonic Shuffle. A lot of people don't really like Sonic Shuffle is because it's mostly a Mario Party ripoff, and I won't deny that it is essentially a Mario Party ripoff, but I'll admit I might be a little biased with this one because this was my first Sega Dreamcast game that I ever owned. But I do have to say, for what it was, I thought it was a pretty cool game. It did each have its own things that did make it more unique compared to Mario Party. Of course, I do consider the Mario Party games to be better games overall, but in terms of story, that's where Sonic Shuffle excelled over Mario Party. And I do have to say, for what it was, I thought it was a pretty fun game. The mini games were pretty alright, the boards were pretty cool, and I thought it was just a very interesting game, and I do think it is relatively underrated on the Dreamcast. But I do have to say that is a game that I do think does get more hate than it should, and I think it is a game that people should take a second look at, because me personally, I think it's a relatively enjoyable game on the console. Now, I'm sure for a lot of you guys, this is the moment that you all have been waiting for, and right here on screen are some of the rarest and most expensive SEGA Dreamcast games that I own. These are the games that did some damage to my bank account. They were not merciful at all when it came to my wallet. These were games that were heavy hitters when it came to pricing. Now, of course, it wasn't all bad, because after all, some of these games are great games, and of course, I do want to finish the SEGA Dreamcast set one day, but it also wasn't bad as well, because I used a few strategies of mine to help me save some money where I would not be spending as much picking some of these games up. Right here on screen, I am showing you guys a video that you guys can check out if you want to learn a few ways that I use to help save me money, so that way you guys can be a little easy on the wallet, and of course pick up some games to add to your collection. But yes, right here are some of the most expensive games that I own. Now, as you can see right here on screen, here are a bunch of games spanning across multiple genres on the SEGA Dreamcast, and these right here are games that I haven't played yet, but I would love to play sometime. One of these that really sticks out to me is Seaman. I've seen gameplay footage of Seaman over the years, and I think it is a game that is very interesting, it's very clever, and clearly SEGA was trying to do right here was try to compete with Hey You Pikachu on the Nintendo 64. And with Seaman, I think it is just a game that I really do want to give a shot at some point or another. It's just because it just looks like a pretty cool game for what it is, and I like how it's just kind of more at a different type of take, trying to compete in with Hey You Pikachu. Now, of course, with me showing off some of these games right here that I haven't played yet, that I do want to give a shot at some point, I would love to hear some of your guys' game recommendations for the SEGA Dreamcast that you guys think I should check out. So comment a few games down below in the comment section if you think there are some games that I should give a shot sometime, because I'm always open to trying new games, especially new games that are pretty fun. Here are some fighting games on the SEGA Dreamcast that I haven't tried yet. I really want to give a shot to Mortal Kombat Gold. I mean, don't get me wrong, Capcom vs. SNK is cool. I did play the sequel several years ago, and of course I have played multiple entries of Virtua Fighter before in the past, but I don't know, there's just something about Mortal Kombat Gold that seems kind of interesting to me. That one I really do want to give a shot, because that game does look pretty cool. Of course, once I'm done with that, I will be giving Virtua Fighter a shot along with Capcom vs. SNK. After all, I did enjoy the sequel with Capcom vs. SNK, so I'm pretty sure that I'll enjoy the original on the Dreamcast as well. Now, right here are a bunch of racing games that I haven't tried yet on the Dreamcast, and I've looked at a good chunk of these, and wow, I gotta say, a lot of these look incredibly fun that I really want to play. I want to talk about Metropolis Street Racer first. This was the first racing game by Bizarre Creations before they would be more known for Geometry Wars and Project Gotham Racing. I've watched a few reviews of Metropolis Street Racer. I've listened to the soundtrack. I think it is a game that I would have a ton of fun playing, so I really gotta clean off the Dreamcast soon and pop this one in, because I think I'll have an incredible time playing Metropolis Street Racer. And I have to talk about Sega Rally 2 on the Dreamcast. I've played Sega Rally on the Saturn, and that was a game that I really did enjoy. I think Sega has made some incredibly great racing games with some great quality quality to them, and I'm sure Sega will easily deliver on some of that quality with Sega Rally 2 on the Dreamcast. And Revolt is another one that looks pretty interesting to me. I know there's a sequel on the original Xbox that I've seen gameplay for many years ago, so I'm sure Revolt on the Dreamcast is going to be another incredibly fun racer on the console itself. And of course, I have to talk about Speed Devils. I've seen some gameplay footage of Speed Devils. That is another racing game that looks incredibly fun. I cannot wait to play some of these games. They just look so fun, and I'm sure I'm going to have an absolute blast trying them out. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out my video. Please be sure to check out these videos here, and here. After all, I post a lot of content when it comes to game collecting tips, and other video game related subjects. So be sure to keep an eye out every Monday and Friday where I upload consistently, and I'll be seeing you guys next time.